businesses and individuals today. For security reasons, you have joined the session automatically on mute and without video. If you have any question, you can use the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen. If you have any technical issues during this event, please feel free to let us know via the chat here and one of us will help you. My name is Kirsten Morgan. I'm the head of practice transformation here at Michigan Derweya, and it's an honor and pleasure to be interviewing Electra Japonas and Roisin Noonan today. Electra and Roisin are from TLB, and TLB is a design-driven legal optimization consultancy. We will find out about what exactly that is in the next 50 minutes or so. We will also be talking about some of TLB's exciting initiatives, such as oneNDA and CrossTech. And Electra and Roisin will also share their key observations and views on the legal industry and the legal profession today. We will save the last 50 minutes for questions from the audience. So if you have any questions for us, please submit them on Zoom. Or if you're in the room, please raise them here when we open up for questions. Electra, Roisin, welcome. To kick us off, could you please tell us about yourselves and your background?
Sure. I'm a lawyer by background, and I've always worked in-house. So I've never worked in a law firm apart from when I did my bar in Cyprus years ago. And then I've always worked in an in-house capacity, kind of as a conduit between legal and the business. So I started off my career at the European Space Agency in the Netherlands, and then I went on to work for British American Tobacco, Airbus, Disney, and then EY for a bit. And basically, in every organisation that I was, I just felt that there was a disconnect between in-house legal and the business. So I started up TLB to bridge that gap.
Yeah, so I started my career at big data, so I was in financial regulation and lots of fintech things. And at that time, blockchain was just, becoming prevalent in the industry, and found sort of a niche there and really enjoyed that. So I was then looking for a role outside of the law firm. I don't think the law firm environment was necessarily exactly for me. So I left and I worked for a fast growth, big US crypto company for a couple of years. And then after that, I was looking for something that was about sort of helping businesses do legal better, and also somewhere where you can have a really fulfilling, fun career as a young lawyer. And then I'm at Electra and joined TLB, and I've been there ever since. So I joined about October 2019 since then.
And what made you start the consultancy? Like you already alluded to that, but can you explain a bit more, and how did you go about setting up?
Yeah, so in my last role at BAT, I did this big negotiation with a big systems integrator. And I spent 4 months at a law firm, the law firm that we were hiring, to support us. And I spent a lot of time negotiating with our lawyers, probably more time than I spent negotiating with our supplier. And I thought there's a disconnect here. And then after the contract was signed, I went on to try and operationalize that contract, because I needed to make sure that people in the business understood what their obligations were. And I also needed to make sure that there was governance so that the contract could be delivered. And I spent the next 4 months basically changing the whole contract. So I was simplifying the language, I was creating training materials, I was making it all much more accessible, I was using design, I was using tech, and I really loved it. And I also thought, this is adding so much value to the business. I want to start a business that does just that. So the first thing I did is I went onto Facebook. And on Facebook, I found an entrepreneurs group. And I said, does anyone want help with their T's and C's? And we can make them more, I can make them more user-friendly and accessible and stuff like that. And I got 2 clients on the first day. And I thought, okay, we're onto something here. And then it just grew from there. And then it happened. And then I started working with scale-ups. I hired my first hire, who was Kalisha, and then Roisin joined us. And then we've grown since.
And what is TLB all about?
Well, I think TLB is really about doing law differently, but not just for the sake of doing law differently. It's about delivering law in a way that works for businesses and takes account of the operational elements of law. So we, as Electra, we always have design at the heart of everything that we do. So whether that be creating something that's user-centric for not just your customers, but also within the business themselves. If you've got a massive contract that's worth $2 billion, but nobody knows what it says and nobody knows what the milestones are, drawing them out of that and making things work on the ground. So design comes into everything we do. We also we help in-house teams optimize the way in which they work. And one way we do that is take away work. So we provide a managed service, contract review and data protection. But on the other side, we make their work much easier and reduce it through design thinking and introducing new T's and C's, etc. And also playbooks. So we make that the ease of negotiating just much easier, so they can stop focusing on this very low value, low level work, and really focus on stuff that adds strategic value, which is why they're there in the first place. It's not to be bogged down in NDAs, for example, which I'm sure we'll come on to.
So you mentioned playbooks and processes, and I think it's all about sort of standardization as well. How do you get lawyers on board on that thinking? Because I made the experience that lawyers quite often don't like sort of process talk and playbooks. So how do you get them on board?
I think if you say this is going to save you time, they're on board. And I think a lot of people who have moved in-house have a sort of more growth mindset, if you like, and people don't want to be bogged down in the crap work that really doesn't need to be done by somebody who's 10 years qualified and getting paid. I don't know how much they're getting paid. So I think you get them on board by telling them that. But I don't think it's often not so much an uphill struggle with a lot of the people that we work with, because they're like, obviously we need this, and we can in-source so much of this to the business if we start thinking about things in a different way.
I do think it's a difficult sell though to lawyers, because I think especially in an in-house scenario, lawyers are quite happy to pay billable hours to law firms. But when it comes to paying to optimize the way they operate, I don't know whether that market's mature enough to proactively seek that sort of support. So I don't think it's mainstream yet. Legal optimization, playbooks, legal design, working smarter isn't really mainstream. So if you think of the in-house profession, it's quite new. It's only been around really for 25 years. Prior to that, you'd outsource everything to your law firm. So I don't think there's a set understanding of what a GC's role is, or what an in-house lawyer needs to be doing. You're just brought in and you're just doing the stuff that you're given, or you're putting out the fires that you've seen. But then once you work with more mature organisations, you see that they are thinking more progressively about how to optimise the way they work, but it's just not entirely clear how they do that. So yeah, I think lots of people think, right, I just need tech. So they go straight to the tech, but that's just such a wrong way of approaching that in my view, because that's putting the cart before the horse. You need to understand what we're doing in the processes before you can actually even think about choosing a solution that's technology based. So it's a hard sell, and I think it requires a lot of education still and a lot of upskilling and understanding of the various areas that impact how you build it with a good fortune.
It's interesting, I think, what you say about tech, and it's not the first thing that should sort of be put in front of people. It's more by the sort of processes and how we do things. Let's think about that. What do you think of the terms of innovation, and what it is in your book?
I don't know what it means, really. And I think with technology, as Electra said, that's putting the cart before the horse. If you put a load of rubbish templates in there, or you don't have any means of properly negotiating, you haven't thought through, how do I actually operationalize this contract? How is it negotiated? Who in the business uses it? And the templates themselves are rubbish. You just put them in and you expect the tech to work wonders for you. Well, it's not going to. If that's the innovative part, well, it's going to fail, because you haven't done any of the thinking around what it is that you're doing, and introducing optimization as a sort of a holistic thing, which is everything. You need to look at everything end to end. So in terms of innovation, I don't really know what the answer to that question is.
I don't even understand what the term means. I think it's really confusing. You get these Chief Innovation Officer. What does it mean? What does it mean? And I think that the legal world is just filled with, it's not just the legal world, the business world is filled with jargon. And I don't think it's helpful. We're not talking about tangible things that work. You're saying innovation. Even legal design is super confusing. Put the word design in, and people get all confused and like, oh, do I need to draw? Do I need to be good at art to do this? No. So it's about explaining what it all means and debunking lots of this jargon that we will use. But yeah, the word innovation for me isn't necessarily conducive to delivering on the innovation agenda.
And actually, on that point, if people don't know what legal design is, we should explain what that is. So legal design is all about taking a user-centric approach to delivering something. So design isn't necessarily It's not about the way that something looks, it's about the process, the design thinking process that you use to get to a certain outcome. So that might be if you've got a set of T's and C's and you want your customers to understand them better because CX are getting 3,000 questions a day from the users. You redesign them with those people in mind, but also your other users, which is the customer experience team, and you give them the materials to be able to answer those questions. So yeah, it's about creating something that's centric around what the user needs.
Tell us about oneNDA. How did it start, and how has it developed since you launched it in February 2021?
Yeah, I mean, oneNDA is one big legal design project, really. It's kind of what we were doing on an individual scale with companies. We then took to industry level. And I think what oneNDA has proven is that design thinking works for transformation. So if you want to manage change and if you want to deliver a change program, you need to take a design thinking approach. So oneNDA started up in March 2021, earlier than that really. So 2020 was a big growth year for TLB because no one was hiring, basically. And everyone was outsourcing stuff. So they were outsourcing all their contracts to us. So we had these accounts that were growing really quickly. Plus, they all realised that actually we need to digitise a lot of the stuff that we're doing. We need playbooks so that we can upskill more junior people really quickly. And we've got a lot of work. So at the end of the year, we did a review of all the contracts that we've looked at. We found that 63% of the agreements we reviewed were NDAs, and that it only accounted for 7% of our revenue. And we had a chat and we said, this is mental. Like, we're contributing to the problem that we're trying to solve as a business, which is to streamline the way in-house legal works. But this is an industry problem. The fact that we're all working off our own NDAs, if we're all saying the same thing, why don't we just say the same thing? Why don't we just have one NDA? So I just went on LinkedIn and I put that thought, which was, why do we all have different NDAs? Why we've got so many expensive lawyers doing the same work again and again? It's really boring. They never get litigated. It's really tough to kind of justify the time and money that we spend on these when we look at the value that they add. And that post went viral. We got 35,000 views. And I had literally hundreds of messages from people saying, this is such a good idea. Why don't we just have one NDA? Or, I thought of this years ago. I wish I'd done it. Obviously, this makes sense. So, when you just hit a nerve and you can feel the market fit, we just went with it. So we set up a website over the course of a weekend, and we said if we can get 100 people to sign up over the course of the next 2 weeks, then we'll spearhead this initiative. And we hit that number 12 hours from launch. And it was the most exciting thing ever. And we also realised that now we have to go and do it. So we did it. And we took a subset of the people that had signed up, and we created a steering committee. And that steering committee comprised of some really cool company names because we needed not only FOMO, but we needed input from the big names that were then going to adopt it to demonstrate to the market that this is a document they can trust. So we did that, and then we released oneNDA in August 2021. Yes, and then we released another version. Then we released another version, so we spent 6 months iterating. So we were gathering feedback from the community, and we iterated and we created version 2. So that's oneNDA, and today we launched a version 0 of oneDPA. So oneDPA is the next project, and that's been launched on the clause stack. oneDPA is the project to standardize the data processing agreement, which is a nightmare, and there's absolutely no reason for it to not be standardized because it's all driven by regulation and case law anyway. So that's project 2.
You launched it today?
We launched it today.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, just now.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Any early sort of figures here for us?
There's a lot of people on there, but also get on there and you can provide feedback, and that's the whole point of that, which obviously will also explain.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yes, so you obviously hit a nerve with the oneNDA. Tell us about clause stack. You already mentioned clause stack. What is the intention behind that?
Yeah. So during oneNDA, so as I said, we hit the 100 people in 12 hours from launch. By the end of the 2 weeks, we had 330 organisations that were on board. By the end of the project, we had 1,000. Sorry, by the time that we got the input bit on the project, we had 1,200 lawyers that gave us their feedback. And then in total, we created an audience of 10,000 lawyers across the world. So a lot of lawyers. And, and to get them all to more or less agree on oneNDA was incredible. And so we were talking, we were saying, we've got this audience, but when you've got an audience, you're broadcasting to them all the time. You don't really get the input unless you invite them to provide you with input. So wouldn't it be amazing if we took this collaboration that we saw with oneNDA and we amplified it by creating a community platform where lawyers could come together to work on different projects, but also to share knowledge and, you know, create different ways of working that are sensible? Because a lot of the stuff that we do as lawyers are not that sensible. We work in really archaic ways. We're not very comfortable with technology. We're not very comfortable with changing processes. But if we all come together and we share knowledge, something that's a complete staple in other industries like the software industry, then I think that can be absolutely transformative for our profession. So we thought, let's take oneNDA and let's use the momentum that we've built to create a community where lawyers can come together and just figure out better ways of working. Because I think that's the way forward if we all share.
And lawyers can submit their own questions and their own problems.
Yeah, that's where it'll go. At the moment, it's sort of focusing on the standardization piece, which is where oneNDA came in and oneDPA. We're not totally sure yet if standardization works for every type of contract, or there's sort of a debate between the level of standardization you go for, sort of hard standardization or soft standardization, where you can amend certain things. But generally speaking, you know, a lot of the work that we do on an individual client basis with legal design. So I described earlier the example of having a user set for T's and C's, and that's just a very discrete project. But a lot of the stuff that we do are really big legal design projects for clients who come to us with loads of templates that all look different. And we have to sit down and we do a full gap analysis across them. We work out what's contained in each of them, and we standardize as much as possible across their template set, which might be, I don't know, 100, and set up a really clear framework so that the business can just go in and input their information. But ClawStack is taking that another step further and trying to do that at an industry level, because I mean, great that we can do that for one client and we can develop efficiencies for them so they can create playbooks across all their templates. It's all the same. But what value is that if everyone does that? You know, it would be great if we could have that sort of level of standardization across the industry, because then everybody doesn't need to be wasting their time negotiating essentially the same thing over and over. So yeah, the two sides of the business are very complementary. It's just that ClawStack is taking it to that next level, which it should be going in that direction anyway, because of the legal tech that can be layered on top of that to really gain the efficiencies that we need.
Yeah, and for now, ClawStack is focused on the standardization projects that we're running, and we're also publishing other standards. So there are other standard documents in the industry that we've put onto ClawStack so people can access them. So it's effectively a library for open source documents, and it's also a place where people could go and collaborate on different projects. At the moment, we're the only ones running a standardization project on it, but we're inviting the whole community to tell us if they want to run a standardization project. They can use ClawStack and they can use our methodology and the infrastructure that we're providing. But in future iterations of ClawStack, the idea is that lawyers will be able to share their own documents that they want to open source. You know, if you're a law firm, for example, and you want to show that you're a thought leader or a market leader in a certain area, you know, the same way you might share your document with PLC so they can publish it, you can share it with ClawStack and the community can access it on an open source level. So that's a really important part of the initiative as well. A lot of the knowledge that we have is either inside people's heads, it's in individual people's heads, it's not being shared, or it's hoarded and it's siloed in various organizations. If we were to open that playing field, we could really gain efficiencies from each other and learn from each other. So that's another thing. And then I think eventually people will start talking to each other and answering questions and sharing knowledge on a more casual basis. So it's effectively so ClawStack is effectively like Stack Overflow crossed with GitHub for law.
Interesting, and I think collaboration, as you say, is so important, especially in a legal profession. How do you think more collaboration can be encouraged, and how can we sort of achieve that in a highly competitive legal sector?
Yeah,
obviously ClawStack is a question.
Yeah, and I think that there's some shyness in the legal industry. If you compare it to software developers, they'll go onto Stack Overflow and they'll have a question, and they're not shy about asking the question because technology is also new. So if they don't know the answer to a question, that's to be expected because it's never been done before. Whereas if you're a lawyer, you're a bit worried. You think, God, what if I go here and I ask the question, it's a stupid question, and everyone thinks that I'm not a great lawyer. So I think we need to create a safe space. And LinkedIn, for example, is not a safe space. It's a place where people go and talk about stuff a lot. And I also talk a lot on LinkedIn, but it's not necessarily a place that you want to share loads of your thoughts and knowledge, because you see trolling, you know, so you want to create a safe space where lawyers can feel like they can come together and ask questions and get responses. So I think that's the way to do it. And just, I think, as with everything, with all the legal design projects that we do, we always say start small and have a POC and demonstrate success and learn from that project, and then use that to build your business case for the next thing. Use it as evidence. So I think that's why we're taking an iterative approach to Fullstack, and starting off with a project where people are already sharing different views, so it gets them used to it, and then go on to the next bit and then the next bit.
So normalising that, I think, is key, and I think oneNDA was great for that. And you know, the level of contribution was just so surprising to me, that people were so willing and so open. And I think when things get a bit more complex, people kind of close down, because as lawyers, you're meant to have all the answers. We are not, but you know, that's the perception, and there's sort of the liability question that people are afraid of. But I think normalising that behaviour, which I think is becoming much more normal as people use Slack and stuff in businesses. You know, people are more used to this sort of more automatic way of advising and communicating with each other. So,
You earlier mentioned your methodology, and actually I read up on your website what that looks like, double diamond. Do you mind just sharing with us, you know, how do you go about a project when you're being instructed by a client? Like, what is your methodology? I think it's so cool.
Yeah, sure. So when somebody instructs us, the first thing we do is do a deep dive, a deep discovery session. I think lawyers can sometimes be a bit uncomfortable with that, because you get given a, you know, go and do this, and you just say, okay, cool, bye, I'll go and do it, and I'll give back to you in 2 weeks' time, and here's your bill. So the first thing we do is really do a full deep dive into what it is that they're looking to achieve, who are their users, what's their tone of voice, what's their brand, what is this document for, what are the processes around it, what playlists you have, etc. Do a full deep dive, and then we'll go away and we'll design something, come back with a draft version, and we'll iterate on it with them, and then we'll go away and we'll create it. And then when we come back, it'll then be tested with sort of a smaller group. So we might roll it out with just a department or so, and do some training materials and make sure everyone's comfortable, and then continue to iterate. And I think every artifact that we create, obviously there's a final date by which it's delivered, but the idea is these things will always be iterated upon, which again, I think lawyers can be a bit uncomfortable with. But something that you deliver is never necessarily the best version of it. It really needs to be sort of out in the wild and seeing how it works.
And in the first phase, we always do, in the discovery bit of the double diamond, we always do this bit where we empathise with the user, which I think is, we don't usually talk about the empathy bit because it sounds quite difficult to kind of get your head around. But effectively, when you're a lawyer, you are trained to draft for the judge, because you're always thinking of the worst case scenario. So when you draft this contract, make sure that if it ever gets in front of a judge, that the judge can, you know, rule in your favour effectively, and that you're going to make it as clear as possible to that judge of what you meant, or you're going to leave it quite opaque, because actually you want the room to manoeuvre if it does go before a judge. But less than 2% of disputes ever even get litigated, and I think that's even a generous amount, considering that not all disputes are ever reported. The end user is usually, especially in a business context, is a layman. They're not lawyers. So when you're drafting a contract, or when you're creating a process that you're expecting the business to engage with, if you're not taking into consideration that end user, you're really missing a trick. And you're actually creating a process that, first of all, people won't want to engage with, or a document that salespeople are scared of. Because even when it comes to an NDA, if the salesperson looks at it and it's full of legal jargon, they're going to be much more reluctant to put it in front of the person that they're dealing with, because it makes you feel a certain way when you can't understand what it says, when you can't defend it, you can't explain it, and you've got to defer to your lawyers. So, you know, you really need to understand who you're doing the work for, who they are, what they want, what their needs are, and take a really human approach to what it is that you're creating, which is, I think, the really fun bit in terms of what we do, understanding who the user is, what their needs are, and then designing appropriately.
So your contracts that you refuse or rewrite, they're much more accessible, I take it.
Yeah, very.
And user business.
Yeah, plain English. We get lots of compliments for our, so say so myself, but we've had really great comments about how accessible the contracts are and how simple they are to understand, and that's how it should be, because you know,
Did a lawyer ever say, "Oh, it's just too simple, too straightforward"?
Well, yeah, it's a spectrum, right? Like, you know, if you're, I don't know, Goldman Sachs and you've got a loan agreement, it's just not going to be written like that, because the chances of that going to litigation are much higher than if you're Monzo and you want, you know, an 11-year-old to understand your T's and C's. So it's like, what's the risk here versus the outcome that I'm trying to achieve over here? I'm trying to make sure an 11-year-old knows what's going on with their money. Versus, I mean, I don't know if they have child accounts. But anyway, you know, in theory, that's the sort of risk versus understandability spectrum that people sort of evaluate.
So what is next for you?
God, okay.
Back to you.
Well, I think from a services perspective, we'd like to see the concepts of legal design and process optimization be more mainstream. And I think we will see that over the next 5 years. I think that organizations, particularly in an in-house lawyer capacity, will understand the importance of those things and how, you know, your job is to protect the business, but you're also now expected to be a commercial enabler. You cannot do that by taking a really risk-averse approach, and you need to optimize your processes, and that's as much your job as the legal support is. So that's one thing. So we'd like to see that area grow and be mainstream. And then from a oneNDA, oneDPA and clause stack perspective, we'd like to build a community that's very active, comes together to collaborate and share knowledge and share better ways of working and open source some of the stuff that's historically just been paywalled so heavily. And yeah, hopefully those two things combined that we're doing can work towards somehow reshaping the legal industry to some extent.
And do you see a difference between sort of a lawyer and a law firm versus in-house in terms of achieving sort of change? And
I think law firms are really driving. I think that there is, in-house are moving quicker because the growth of in-house just continues. I mean, people are moving out of law firms, going in-house more and more, and there's a real incentive for them to innovate, if we want to use that word, because they need to gain efficiencies, because they literally don't have time to be doing the sort of lower level stuff. So I think, I do think that from a law firm perspective, there's not just the incentive to innovate because clients are asking them to, but because, you know, there are cost pressures and they need to get smarter and sort of cut the fat where they can to be able to deliver on the really high value stuff that they do and are so good at, and why people come to law firms for absolutely, you know, spot on expert advice. So I think both. In-house is probably going to move a little bit quicker.
Yeah, I think law firms are more risk averse for sure. I think that they're slower to react because I think they can, and they're probably not feeling the pain as much as a sole counsel in an in-house role who's being asked to mitigate all the risks and get all the contracts reviewed and advise the business strategically and also buy CLM. You know, they've got all that stuff going on. Whereas in a law firm capacity, I think that we have seen slower response, and we've done a bit of work with law firms, and there's definitely appetite, but I think that the pace is definitely slower. And hopefully that will accelerate because supply, or demand rather, should drive supply. When you're in an in-house capacity, you want to be able to rely on your law firm panel to be able to do more than just give you legal advice. You want to turn to them and say, look, you're seeing, the advantage that law firms have is that they have this view, this eagle-eye view of the whole of the industry, potentially. They can see how their clients are working. So you could use those learnings to provide this really unique insight so that your clients can benefit from it. So I think, hopefully we'll see that.
And what do you see as the biggest opportunities for law firms and legal departments?
I think being more holistic. From my experience working with law firms, it has been on a lot of occasions quite specific. You know, they provide you with advice, and it's risk-averse advice, and it's advice that's going to help you make sure that you're protecting yourself. But I think taking a more, you know, having a higher risk threshold, I think, and being more pragmatic with what the client needs, and taking that design approach, like the client needs that, but they also need this. So being able to diversify and use your insight, I think, is a really amazing opportunity.
Yeah, and just building on that, something that often happens to us is that they've got a set of templates that have been drafted by law firms, and they ask us to redesign it, which is not really where we want to be. It's not really where the client wants to be, obviously, because they're double paying. So I think, as Electra said, really thinking about being more holistic, but also thinking about who it is that you're designing this for. Is it for your client, or is it for your client's customers, or whatever? Because otherwise they're just going to end up with something they can't use, and they're going to be back at square one.
We're obviously coming out of the pandemic, hopefully, fingers crossed. What have been your main observations of the last 2 years?
I think that because so much has now become remote, and people are just sat at their desk a lot. I mean, a lot of people back in the office now, but at the time, particularly during the pandemic, people really getting glued to their desks, particularly in-house lawyers. They just really don't have time to be doing lots of the low-level work, and the expectation that you're sort of sat there all day, that the amount of time that they had to sort of think and create, I think had gotten smaller and remains quite small. So I think that's been a big change, and that's been people calling on our services, because when you don't have time to think and get the help of somebody else to allow you to have that time. So I think even the constriction of time available to in-house lawyers continues to shrink, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, I think that without the distractions of the office and the chats and the friendships and the relationships that we build in the office, I think without that, there's more focus on the actual work and an understanding of, or maybe a realization that this is really repetitive. Why am I doing this constantly? And more junior members of staff wanting more of a challenge that's coming from their actual work rather than from the overall package that you used to get. It is a much narrower world to an extent. So there's a higher expectation of what it is that you're doing and the quality of your work. So that's what we've seen. That we've seen people move away from behaviours that in the past weren't such a problem to those things being really bad. Like, no, we're not going to have this. E-signatures are good. I mean, when you think of e-signature as innovation, we think, God, what are we? 1992, what are we talking about here? But people have moved away from processes that they said they absolutely could not move away from because they had to do this in this way so quickly over the pandemic. And I think the pandemic will accelerate the legal profession because people are just much more aware of what they're doing and they want better quality of work. And they're happier to take a risk to get to that. So,
what are your predictions for the next few years, decade?
I hope that people, it's not a prediction per se, it's a hope. I hope that people will be more open to the sort of cross-industry collaboration, because I think it can just yield so many results for everybody, including law firms and clients who don't want to instruct law firms to do a little template, and law firms don't really want to do it either and are offering things for free. And I think there's so much value to be gained from people sharing that knowledge more openly. So yeah, that's where I hope the industry will go.
I think that tech will become a staple in in-house legal teams and also in law firms. I think in law firms it already is to an extent, but even more so. And I think that the collaboration of consultancy type work and tech and law all together will create a different landscape for legal services. So I see that happening quite imminently. I'm going to say over the next 5 years, I think we'll see a completely different legal services landscape.
And do you think the sort of profile of a typical lawyer will be a different one in the next sort of 5 to 10 years?
Yeah.
What is the sort of new lawyer like in your mind?
Yeah.
I think I think we're already seeing them actually, but I do think you have some people who left law firms and then joined scale-ups, I don't know, 5 years ago, and maybe they were a little bit out of their depth, but I don't think people are really in that mindset anymore, because as you say, law firms have tech available to them. Younger people know what's going on in terms of the tech landscape more broadly. It's like I mentioned Slack earlier, and people know how to use these things. So I think they're more attuned to that. But I think we're seeing that now, frankly, particularly in the sort of scale-up space.
Yeah. I think there's a long way to go for universities and what they teach you at uni, because I came out of uni, I did my training contract, and I went into my training contract having no idea how to review a contract. I mean, what's that about? They don't teach you real skills. And so you have to go onto the job. And I think universities can do a lot more in educating their students around what it is that a legal profession looks like and what skills you need to develop. So being tech literate, I think, is a thing that Millennials and Gen Zs are really, we're there, all with phones in their hands. So they expect to be able to manage everything on their fingertips. But how do you apply that to your profession? And how do you use that skill set? And yeah, I think studying is really important, and the way that we are bringing up lawyers, both during their university years and during their training contracts, can be a lot more holistic.
Great. I looked at your About Us section on the website, and I was just surprised to see all these ladies. Like it seems that your organization is managed by a powerful team of women. So I was wondering, what advice would you give to other females who might want to kind of break into that industry of legal consulting or tech?
Yeah, well, we're not deliberately all women. We'd like some men to apply, so please do. We actually have a vacancy now at the moment, so please apply. But yeah, I mean, the advice is just go for it, and there will be challenges that are different to you. I'm now pregnant, and I have to go on maternity leave soon. So that's a challenge that a man won't necessarily have to face. But when you have a team around you and you've got support, it's a very supportive environment where we work, you have to just do it. So yeah, I don't have specific advice for women who want to break into the legal tech or the legal ops industry, other than it's a very supportive industry, very supportive. And if you're interested, go for it.
Yeah, I would agree. Just do it. Just do what you can. But I think maybe going to some events is quite a good thing. Legal Geek. I don't know if anybody's been but that's quite. There's loads of legal tech, legal consultancies. It's a really great event. So doing stuff like that, just trying to get exposure as much as you can to those sorts of things, and then just take every opportunity.
And LinkedIn's good.
Yeah.
LinkedIn's good. Yeah.
Speaking of events, do you have any events coming up that we're going to see you in action in person?
We're going to the in-house
Alternative in-house
summit this next Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
We've got Surmise's Tech Play Date, which is on Tuesday, where you get to interact with different legal tech products, and we're showcasing ClawStack there as well. So it'll be our first demo. That's fun. We'll be at Legal Geek later on this year in September.
Do we have any questions from anyone on Zoom? Anyone? Do you have any comments? Any final words for us? Anything? Closing remarks, calls for action, key messages?
People might want to join ClawStack and check it out, and check out oneNDA, particularly the data privacy lawyers. If they've got any online, that would be really good. I think that's
And on oneNDA, we're really lucky because this year we're sponsored by PwC UK and also by ContractPod.ai. And with ContractPod, we've also got this collaboration at the end of the project, which will allow us to demonstrate how technology can be layered on top of standardization to really streamline the process. So I'm really excited about that. So please.
Exactly your points. Right?
Yes, exactly. So standardization is amazing, but if you layer that with really good tech, then you're onto another level of streamlining. So yeah, please join ClawStack. Join ClawStack and give us your comments on oneNDA because we need them.
Good call for action.
Yeah.
I hope to see a few Michelin bars on there.
Yeah, me too.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was really good to hear insights and such an exciting initiative. And hopefully collaboration will take off in a meaningful way. All the best, obviously, also for your. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.